Russia has fired more than 700 drones at Ukraine overnight in what's being described as the largest attack since Russia launched the war more than 3 years ago. This is the damage in the northwestern city of Lutsk. It was among the hardest hit areas. The Ukrainian Air Force says Russia fired a total of 728 drones and 13 missiles. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is in Rome. He's going to be meeting with the Pope later today. The latest Russian attack comes just hours after President Trump gave an unfiltered assessment of his frustration with Putin.
We're not happy with Putin. I'm not happy with Putin. I can tell you that much right now, because he's killing a lot of people, and a lot of them are his soldiers. We get a lot of bull thrown at us by Putin, for you want to know the truth. He's very nice all the time, but it turns out to be meaningless.
All right, I want to bring in CTV's U.S. political analyst Eric Ham. Good morning to you, Eric. Once again, President Trump using expletives. That means he is not happy. Can you talk to us about where we are in the relationship, it seems, between Putin and President Trump? Shortly after Trump made those comments, there was this big attack overnight on Ukraine.
Yeah, and I think what we're seeing here is President Donald Trump is reaching a boiling point. We know this is one of his signature campaign promises, to be able to end this war. He made clear that if he were president, it never would have happened. And he talked about his relationship with Vladimir Putin. And we have seen the president speak oftentimes as if he is carrying talking points for the Kremlin. But I think what we're seeing now is President Trump seems to be coming around to the fact that what Vladimir Putin says to him, and then what he does is something completely different. And I think that's also why we saw now the United States end this pause of weapons that it was sending to Ukraine. And clearly, it appears as though the president now is moving to a place where many Western nations, quite frankly, are relieved to see the United States. The United States has been one of the biggest benefactor or the biggest donor of weapons to Ukraine. And now I think what we're seeing here is President Donald Trump is moving closer and closer to that position of actually providing more assistance to Ukraine, not less.
Yeah, as you point out, that announcement came yesterday, and it seemed to take the president by surprise that there had been a pause on weapons going to Ukraine. And now we're learning from reports that it was Pete Hegseth at the Pentagon who made that decision to pause shipments to Ukraine. Tell us more about that and why that decision would have been made unilaterally.
Yeah, again, I think what we saw, and I think there's a bit of doublespeak that's playing out between the Pentagon and the White House, where I think, quite frankly, the Pentagon is actually providing cover to the White House in terms of what it did. We know that Pete Hegseth certainly would have never made a unilateral decision like that without giving a heads up to the president. But again, if you go back to those messages that were leaked on social media that featured a number of Trump administration officials, I think we see that the White House, quite frankly, has not wanted to provide additional assistance, military assistance, not just to Ukraine, but to all of Europe. And so it was no surprise that there was that actual pause, even though the president says he was unaware of that. But again, I think a lot of, in terms of what we're saying from Vladimir Putin saying one thing and doing another, I think that's also par for the course in terms of how this White House operates as well.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to watch how this one plays out between Trump and Putin, because, as you rightly point out, he's had so much praise for Putin in the past. I want to ask you, lastly, about the president announcing more tariffs yesterday, 50% on copper. He's also talking about pharmaceuticals. Why now? Why these areas? What does this mean for Canada, Eric?
You know, it's so hard to actually gauge exactly what the president is attempting to do with these tariffs. We have seen from the moment the president announced these tariffs on Liberation Day how debilitating they are, not only for consumers on both sides of the border, but also, more importantly, for the markets. And now, again, I think the president has made clear, and I think this goes back to his comments of economic warfare against one of America's biggest trading partners. And I think as much as the president oftentimes will praise the Prime Minister, Mark Carney, I think still there's a lot of discord, a lot of disdain that the president has in terms of his thinking that Canada is somehow taking advantage of the United States. And I think that's why we see the president continue to double down on these tariffs against Canada. And I think we're going to continue to see this play out for the remainder of his term.
Eric Ham for us this morning. Eric, great to see you.